Hello, San Francisco. Hello and welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. My name is Blake Buettner, and I am not in studio today. I am coming at you live from, live to you lot in front of me at least, from the show floor of San Francisco Windup Watch Fair. Thank you all so much for being here. We love and appreciate all of you. Yes, give yourselves a round of applause. I am really excited about today's guest. I'm joined, of course, first of all, Zach Kazan. Hello, Zach. Not holding down the fort in Concord.
Hello, Blake. It's good to be here in San Francisco. Great turnout, great venue. Terra Gallery. It's great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terra SF. And we have a distinguished guest, former colleague, longtime friend, Stephen Pulvirent. Stephen, welcome to the Worn and Wound podcast. Thank you for being at the Windup Watch Fair.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. I mean, I live in LA now, on the opposite coast from you guys, and it's so good to see this many people turn out for a watch event on the West Coast. It's a nice treat for me, honestly.
Yeah, of course. We love the community out here, and we love being a part of it and getting to interface and get engaged with you guys. See some really incredible watches as well. A lot of them on display in this very building. All right, we got a lot of fun stuff that we're going to talk about today. Before we get into any of that, though, if we get into any of that, let's do a wrist check first. Stephen, what are you wearing today?
Yeah, so I'm wearing a Swatch Skin. It's a little like 34 millimeter plastic swatch on a metal bracelet. It's easy to slip into my pocket, so while I'm walking around trying watches on, I don't have to worry about like what am I going to do with my watch. So that's why I brought this out for the 2 days.
Lovely. It's paper thin.
It's super, super thin, yeah.
Is that the OEM bracelet too?
Yeah, this is the bracelet that it comes on.
Wow, beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. I really love this, yeah. It's a nice, fun little kind of no frills, don't have to worry about it. It's kind of
love
nice.
it.
Thanks.
All right. Zach, what do you got on?
I'm wearing the Louis Erard X Atelier Louis limited edition that I picked up not too long ago. It's kind of a fun avant-garde watch, brand agnostic here at the show. So yeah,
it's very cool. A watch, of course, we know and love. We just saw a really interesting new collaboration from Louis Erard.
Louis Erard and Constantine
They're hot on
Chaikin.
this game right now. Constantine Chaikin,
Yeah.
kind of a wrist Mons inspired watch. Did you see this thing?
Yeah, I did. It's pretty
What do
wild.
you think of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my thing, but it's a cool thing. It's not my thing, but it's a cool thing for sure.
I'm probably on that side of it as well.
Yeah, that's okay though.
Something about those watches makes me taps into something that makes me a little uncomfortable on the inside.
Is it the rotating mouth?
That might have something to do with it. This one is inspired by a Cyclops, though, and like a rotating set of teeth underneath. Yeah. Very cool watch, though. I'm glad to see them doing, like, really kind of just pushing the boundaries with their collaborations.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I still think the Alain Silberstein is my favorite collaboration that they've done.
I think I'm with you there.
Yeah. So I am wearing a Brew metric. This is the black PVD version that he just recently came out with. Huge fan of the metric. We've known Jonathan for a long time, and I've had trouble getting a metric for a long time. So when this released, I immediately hit that buy button. I love that we've all got kind of different, unique watches on. This maybe has something that will do with the theme that we're going to talk about today, which is kind of finding your own individual sense of taste, style, cultivating your own watch collection, even style, in the midst of a lot of outside influences right now. I think we're all on Instagram, maybe. We're all a part of other watch communities. We all get on forums. We see state of the collections. We see hype watches come across our feed a lot. It's hard to build up, I think, a sense of, all right, this is who I am. This is the kind of stuff that I like outside of all of that. Even if we say, oh, no, that doesn't influence me. It kind of does in some ways.
For sure.
100%.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's okay, maybe a little bit. So, I kind of wanted to first ask, like, Stephen, if there's any watches that, you feel were instrumental in kind of like setting the template for you.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I was lucky pretty early on in my career while I was still a student. I was working, part-time as a journalist. I had a blog, all of that. I worked for this company in London that had an arts and culture paper, and that's what I worked on. I was copy editing and transcribing interviews and doing the kind of grunt work that like 20-year-old would-be journalists do. And within that building, though, the company that owned this publication also did PR and marketing and a bunch of other things, and they represented some really top-flight watch brands. They represented IWC, they represented Lange, they represented Bremont, like really great brands. And that was my first like real up close exposure to those things. As a kid, like I knew what the Cartier tank was. I knew what a Rolex was. I don't think I necessarily would have even known like the models, but like I knew what a Rolex looked like. But this was the first time I saw watches like really up close and personal and could talk to people who like really knew what was going on. And so, yeah, in some funny ways, like the IWC Portuguese, the chronograph, the white dial with the blue hands and markers, like that watch is one of the first watches. I didn't know that existed before that. And it really kind of opened my eyes to this whole other world of what watches could be. The Lange Zeitwerk is another one where I was like, at 20 years old, I was like, what the hell is this? Like, somebody explain this to me. Like, why does this exist? What is it? How does it work? And it was the first time I started asking those questions about watches. So those are just a few touch points that like I keep finding myself coming back to over and over again, both in terms of the actual watches and also the sorts of like questions they make me ask and ideas they make me have.
Yeah. So that kind of set maybe the center point of your lane kind of going forward?
Yeah, I think so. I think a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. Zach, do you have any specific watches that you remember?
Not really. I've always sort of, I'm really driven by aesthetics. Like I like to own watches that I think look cool, like fundamentally. That's sort of what drives me. The first watch that I ever really loved, that I think I really connected with, and that sort of like flung me into the hobby was a Seiko Orange Monster. I think it was a second gen one that I had.
You're probably not alone there. I'm sure many of us out here.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty common like gateway watch, and I just like I love that it had an orange dial, and it's a tool watch, and it's a dive watch, and it's very functional, but I don't really care about any of that. I just like kind of loved having this like big chunky watch with an orange dial because at the time that was sort of like the look that I was into, and I just really enjoyed it. And my taste has changed over the years, and I've bought and sold a couple of Orange Monsters over the years, trying to kind of like recapture that. I currently have one in the collection. It needs a service, so I need to like send it in. But really, more than anything, it's just kind of like trying to find things that appeal to me aesthetically for different reasons. That's sort of what it's driven me, and that's how I connected to watches initially in the first place.
At the end of the day, I think this is a core component for all of us. Regardless of how we talk about watches, I know that a lot of us are into watches for different reasons. We like tool watches, we like dress watches, we like exotic watches. At the end of the day, we have to like how it looks aesthetically.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, like you have to look at it all day, right? Like you can be as interested as you want in the movement. You can be as interested as you want in the like materials innovations, in the design concept, in the people who make it. Like these are all great reasons to love a watch, but ultimately you have to look at it. Like if you don't like how the dial looks, if you don't like how it looks on your wrist, I just don't think you're going to end up liking it. You're going to end up wanting to get rid of it and move on to something else. And that's an important process to undergo, I think. Like I think that's how you refine your taste, is you try things and it doesn't work and you keep trying. But I think, yeah, ultimately I'm kind of in the same boat. Like if it's not a watch that immediately like catches my eye, it's kind of a moot point for me.
Yeah, I think there's something I'm beginning to appreciate. And I'm always a big advocate of watches are what you make of them. I know a lot of people kind of lament, Rolex is just a luxury jewelry brand. Well, they're still tool watches, and they're pretty good at them if you use them as a tool watch.
Yeah, I've heard they're pretty good.
It's a tool watch, and it's a great one at that. But even as practical as these things are, and as much as we like them for their practical components, there's still an aesthetic consideration there that's being made, even if we have a hard time admitting it to ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah, 100%.
And to underscore this, one of the watches that kind of set the template for me early on was a good friend of ours, had a 5512 Submariner, which there was something magical about it. And of course, you kind of like learn the history of the Submariner and all the like kind of.
That was a really nice watch.
And that's a really nice.
It's a really nice watch too. Yeah.
You know, ironically, it's kind of like the archetype tool diver watch. I'm not a diver. I don't do like a whole ton of like crazy stuff like that. But I love the practical element of the watch. But I also like the way that it looked, and I think it's okay to admit that.
Completely, yeah.
It's a good looking watch, and there's nothing wrong with it, right? And so.
Tool watches often are like very attractive. You know, yeah. I mean, I'm not a tool watch guy, but I own tool watches that I just, I find aesthetically pleasing. I find beautiful. Even though they're, I'm not like putting them like through their paces as much as maybe they could be, but I just really enjoy them.
That's okay. I think a lot of us have dive watches and pilots watches, and probably not.
I am not a pilot.
Of us are divers or pilots or anything
I own
like
several pilots watches. I've never flown a plane.
And that's okay. Do these
feel like I
genres need a little bit of a? I see a lot of brands kind of trying to enter, at least position their watch as to kind of go anywhere, do anything type watch. They're reluctant to kind of label it as this or that, because it is something I hear said about the Submariner a lot, is like it kind of goes with anything. Like how important is that? And like should watch brands want to have a watch that just goes with anything, or a watch this looks really good with a suit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends, I guess, on who's asking that question and why, to some extent, right? Like, should brands, I understand why brands do that, right? From a really practical standpoint, if you're starting a company, especially making watches, it's super capital intensive. It's really time intensive. For those working with the Swiss, we love you, but like the Swiss are not quick at anything. So like you have to be willing to wait. You have to be willing to invest. And so if you're doing that, I understand the impulse to say like, well, we don't want to pigeonhole this because we need to move units and we need to move them to a variety of people. We need to get a mix of people to buy into the brand. Like I totally get it. And I think there's 1,000% a world for that. I also like can't help but love things that are super narrowly tailored. Like there's something really nice about somebody saying, you know what, we made it for this purpose. These are the ideas. We're really not compromising, and it's this thing. And if you like that, great. If you don't, maybe next time.
Even if it doesn't fit in a neatly predefined box.
Sure, yeah. I mean, and it's like, if a brand says we're going to make our version of like the ultimate pilot's watch, great. I'm equally excited if you're just like, we're going to make the ultimate version of our watch. I think either of those is a great way to go.
This brings to mind a brand that I think we're all pretty fond of, Grand Seiko. I know they do a lot of watches that are maybe neither here nor there in terms of like a tool watch or a diver. Like it's none of that, and it's not really like trying to be any of that. It's just a Grand Seiko, and it's pretty good at being. I know they do sports watches and divers watches and things like that, but the Evolution 9, for instance, GMT. What is that? And is it just for our like? Does that need to be this is like an Explorer 2 tool watch, or it's just a Grand Seiko, and it's like pretty good at being that,
Yeah, I think you can kind of just like run around in circles, trying to put those Grand Seikos into a specific category, trying to compare them to some other like iconic watch. They're their own thing. They do things their own way.
I remember one of the first watches that made me kind of double take in terms of this isn't what I expected a watch to be. Way back when, many years ago, founder of which is sitting in the audience here, Jeff Zetum, XETUM. This is a brand. It's been a little while, but those are watches that had a lugless design. It was kind of had this architectural quality to the design, and that kind of showed me something. Oh, watches don't have to be this specific thing, and I think that opened the doors for a lot of other kind of brands to follow suit, and a lot of which we see kind of around us today. So, shout out to you, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that's really stood out to me walking around here is like, I can't tell you how badly I wish this all existed when I started getting into watches. Like when and I'm not that old, like when I was getting into this, let's say less than 15 years ago, right? Like, sure, if you wanted to go really high end, MB&F already existed, Urwerk already existed. Those guys were doing those things. I don't want to take that away from them. But if you didn't want to spend $50,000, most watches kind of like looked kind of the same. And there was like a handful of aesthetics. There were a handful of price points. And that's kind of like you got what you got. And the fact that now if you're getting into the hobby, or if you've been into the hobby and you're looking for like new things and new ideas and new things to get excited about, there's so many good things and there are a huge variety of price points. Like, you can buy an awesome watch that you'll have a lot of fun with. Maybe not here, but you can buy one for under $100. You can also spend $100,000, and you can spend now anywhere in the middle. And I feel like it used to be there were pockets of price ranges, but huge gaps between them. And it's cool that we're seeing people fill those gaps and fill them with an eye towards creativity and towards value and towards customer excitement. And again, I just really selfishly wish that was around when I got started,
Yeah, that's what gets me excited is the creativity that you see when you're walking around Windup. Is you go to every booth and every brand has like a very unique perspective, and they might make a like a traditional like Dive Watch, let's say, but they have their own take on it. And then like the next booth has something totally crazy that you've never seen before. And you can really kind of like get a sense of like the broader watch world, just kind of like experiencing each brand here from walking around the booths and from talking to people too. Because that's the other thing is people come here with watches that are interesting, and of course everyone wants to talk to each other about the watches that they're wearing. We're watch people, so that's great.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that the past few years has been pretty interesting in this space. The kind of rise of this hype watch concept. It's brought a lot of people into the space for a variety of reasons, which I think is okay. And if some people are brought in because they, Rolex Daytona or Cartier Tank or whatever, it's like achieved something, and it's brought these people into the space, but they end up sticking around and they realize they maybe can't go and get a Daytona for whatever reason. We're not going to go into that, but they start to realize that they might like watches, and they can discover, there's a lot of other really interesting brands doing things besides the Rolexes of the world and the brands that you maybe have a hard time getting something from. And then you start to develop your own sense of how you put this together, and which I think is a really good thing and has helped out a lot of us. And hopefully a lot of people end up sticking around at the end of the day because they find something that they love elsewhere, So I feel this has had its own benefits for all of us.
Yeah, totally. And like I'll be the first one to say, like, I think the fact that everywhere you look, there's hype around 3 or 4 brands. You can't get any of the watches. They're going for 3-4x retail on the aftermarket. For those of us who are like in this world, whether it's as a career or as like a real hobby, it's super annoying and it's frustrating. And like, yes, I understand that. I also just want to say, like, it's also a net positive for every person in this building, that hype and that attention is taking a thing that previously was a niche and that previously had a whole bunch of material constraints around it, and it's removing those constraints. More people are talking about watches now than maybe ever have, at least in the last couple of decades. More money is flowing into watches than has flowed into watches in decades. More people are open to investing in watch brands. More people are excited about creating their own watch brands. More people are excited about collecting other things while maybe they wait for that Daytona on the wait list. I think it's easy in the world we all operate in and live in to say like, ugh, this is a joke and it's so frustrating and like it's kind of bullshit, to be honest. But it's also, I think, ultimately a net positive. I think more people excited about watches is just good for everyone. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking to spend $150,000 on a Richard Mille, 20, 30 grand on an aftermarket Daytona, or whether you want to come here and find something you've never seen before. All of those things I think are positive, and I think they're all interrelated too.
It's really kind of amazing to think that, like, I don't consider this a niche hobby anymore. Like, it's really a mainstream hobby. There have been so many kind of like crossover moments where watches have kind of like been part of like the mainstream, media conversation. Like the Moonswatch is a really good example of that. People just kind of in my circles who are not like traditionally into watches, like they are now talking to me about watches. They notice watches, worn, like in movies or TV shows or like, in advertisements or whatever. And those are, sometimes hype watches, what we call hype watches, but they are kind of like increasing the, number of people who, exactly as you said, who are coming into the hobby and curious about it. And I think that is a positive thing overall.
Yeah, absolutely. And we see a lot of incredible watches walk through this room. I've seen a few Daytonas, a few Nautiluses, and I love seeing that those people are there. And those are all great watches. I have nothing against any of those watches. But they're still here and appreciating, they're not above or below. It's all got, the enthusiasm is the same. How we treat those watches is the same. We don't put any of these watches up on a pedestal. We've been around long enough that before the Daytona hype and the 5711 hype or anything. My thoughts on those watches hasn't really changed over the years, even though it's
sure, yeah,
it's gone through. It's from being a $20,000 to a $100,000 watch back to a whatever it is now. I don't really care, and it's not really about like the status element of it. We're just as enthusiastic about some of these watches as we always have been. But it's certainly hard to be in like like on Instagram and being looking for.
Instagram's the worst.
Is Instagram the worst?
It's so bad.
I see a lot of nodding heads out here. Okay, well, it's not a good place to be if you're looking to, you've got a couple of watches and you're just into this and you're thinking, what do I like, or how do I gravitate towards this? You maybe don't spend a lot of time on Instagram because we showing the same kind of
You
things.
have to
over and
figure
over
out a way
again.
to make it to save your mental health and just not see all of the the same watches over and over again. It's like it can make you go crazy.
Yeah, it can definitely make you crazy. I think there's a flip side to it, which is that whether we want to admit it or not, like all taste is about being a magpie. Like nobody has unique taste. Like find me a person with unique taste, that they don't exist. Like I'll tell you right now, like everybody is synthesizing the things they see and they experience and that they aspire to, interpreting them, mixing them together. Everybody has a unique experience. So everybody's inputs are different. The difference there is that on Instagram, everybody's getting a lot of the same inputs, but ultimately nobody's getting the exact same inputs. So even if you feel like you're just drowning in a sea of pictures where it seems like everybody owns a Gold Royal Oak and a Nautilus and a Daytona and nobody cares about any other watches, like that's not true. We all know that's not true. And you can synthesize those inputs, I think, in your own way and come up with something maybe that feels a little better, a little more you, a little more complete. But I don't know. I also think that the idea that like taste has to be unique to be good, or you can't like things that other people like or that are like popular or hype, it's this like weird sort of like hierarchy of trying to like everybody's trying to one up each other, and at a certain point, like if you can't one up by having a like rarer, more expensive thing, then you one up by being like, well, the rare expensive thing is actually just for like rich guys who don't know anything. So I'm going to show you my thing. And it's like, it's all the same thing. It's just how we're doing it and the strategies we're undertaking. So that's kind of a long, rambly way of saying like, yes, there's an echo chamber that's real, but I actually don't think that's like much different than how taste has worked for like hundreds of years.
Like we shouldn't have to feel bad about our taste if we see some overlap over there. You shouldn't have to apologize for liking this or
and you know what? Like at the end of the day, like I love I'm not a Daytona guy, but like the Daytona's a nice watch. And like if Royal Oaks were not selling at the crazy prices they're selling at, and if I didn't have to buy 12 other watches to get one, like I might want one. If I could get a Nautilus for retail or below retail, which was possible like as little as 5 or 6 years ago, like, would I maybe want to try to save up and make that happen? Like, maybe, who knows? But yeah, I think I think there's like a difference between the hype itself and then the effect of that hype, and there's a gap there. And I think there's some interesting stuff going on in that gap.
Do you feel like some of these watches have been like taken over or claimed by a space that maybe we don't identify with, and that's why we feel uncomfortable with it? Like, oh, I've liked these watches for a long time, but now I always see it in this context, and I'm not like that.
I think so, but I think like to your point, that's kind of like all in our heads, just from what like the way that we experience social media and watch media and the forums and all of these things kind of coming together. I think there's an element of that, but if you're a curious watch collector, you will eventually find like the interesting stuff that like really appeals to you, and be able to appreciate it, outside of that, like the hype train.
Yeah, and I think to your point, right? Like you see, I think there's a difference between like your own experience and then how you relate to others, right? And like as I was saying, I think like you can still experience the hype watches and whatever, be drowning in the Instagram photos, and still develop your own taste. But what you can't do is control other people, and you can't make assumptions about other people in the way that maybe you could before. So, if I'm out at a restaurant and I see somebody wearing, I won't pick a specific brand here. I'll keep this nice and brand agnostic. But, if I see somebody wearing something that I'll say is interesting and maybe not super hype, I immediately know that we have something in common. And maybe I'll say something to them. Maybe I'll say like, oh, hey, nice, whatever. And we can start a conversation. It used to be, if you saw somebody in even, let's say, New York, where, even 10 years ago, watch culture was pretty unsaturated, let's say. Like, if you were out at a nice restaurant in Midtown having a lunch meeting with somebody, and you saw somebody wearing a Nautilus or a Royal Oak, you maybe could assume that you had something in common with those people and that they were hobbyists or they were at least interested, and you can make that assumption, and you just can't anymore. And they could be a watch enthusiast. They could just be a finance bro who bought what their friend told them to buy. They could be somebody who got the watch as a gift. Like, you don't know. And so I do think, to your point, like it changes the calculus for the like community and hobby aspect of this in a way that maybe you didn't have to like pay quite as close attention before.
No, I think that's excellent points, and I think I always pay attention to the curiosity level is usually what tells me more than anything, regardless of what I feel about the watch that they're wearing. If they have something to tell me about it that really pulls me in, then I appreciate that about it.
Definitely.
And it's regardless of my feelings on the watch, or if I pigeonhole them because of X, Y, Z, whether it's a Zin U50 or a Daytona, and they can talk to me about the 6139 all the way up onto the watches that we have now. Like, that's kind of what pulls me in, is that passion.
That's
totally agree.
That's a definition of enthusiasm, right? Like someone who like wants to talk to you about like this thing that they're interested in, and that's like not what you get, with that like the finance bro with the Nautilus or whatever. Like, that's
not that they can't be that way, but yeah.
Sure. And also, like, to be honest, not that's also, in my opinion, like not a bad thing for watches. Like, ultimately, like, this is a luxury industry. Sure, it's varying grades of quote unquote luxury, but like, if you're buying a mechanical timekeeping device in 2023, it's a luxury. Like, nobody needs one. None of it.
They're a patron of this historic industry and helping it, whether they realize it or not, and that's good for everybody.
And like, the industry needs money, and like, it needs people to buy things in order to survive, and it needs people to care, and it needs people to be, to some extent, like, you need wealthy people in their offices, like, kind of judging each other and chatting each other up about the watches they're wearing. Like, the industry needs it to survive. And it might seem like, oh, well, maybe that only affects a couple brands at the top, but let's not forget, just on a really nuts and bolts level, like, everyone's using the same suppliers. Everyone's getting their crystals made by the same people. Everyone's getting their screws made by the same people. Everyone's buying Ebosch movements from the same people. So, like, if Rolex and AP and Patek are having a hard time, I honestly think like everyone in this building is having a hard time because suppliers disappear, access to parts gets difficult. Like, we need a fully healthy ecosystem for any of this to survive. And I actually think the explosion at the sort of top end has allowed a lot of the creativity to be injected into the industry, because now suppliers can afford to sell somebody 20 movements at a time, because they know the big client down in La Chaux-de-Fonds or whatever is going to be ordering 15,000. So, like, sure, we'll sell 20 to the guy who's starting a micro brand or whatever. That doesn't happen if those companies can't pay their teams,
Yeah, exactly. And that's a healthy thing. I think it's okay for a lot of people to get into this space is because of the luxurious aspect or the fashion kind of connection, which I think is very relevant today. So maybe not because they're curious and they want to nerd out about like the balance cock engraving or something, but like they really enjoy the way that it looks and the material and all that, and which is just as valid as any of us being into it for our own reasons. But obviously that's like a much kind of broader realm.
Totally.
And I've always thought of you as a pretty stylish guy. Have you brought watches in that you feel like because it kind of matches your own personal style, or like has that influence? Was one influence the other?
Yeah, I mean, my I'll call it a shtick. My shtick is pretty consistent. Whether it's clothes or my wife and I collect furniture. I collect ceramics, watches, obviously. Like, my taste in everything follows pretty similar paths. I'm interested in things that appear simple but actually aren't as simple as they look. I'm interested in things that reward looking a second, third, fourth time. I'm interested in things that age well as opposed to wearing out. I'm interested in things with a sort of like simple, relatively like camouflaged aesthetic. Like, I don't want to like go someplace or have someone come to my home and ever like their impression is just like, well, this is like doing a thing, or like this is expensive, or this is whatever. Like, I want things to be like nice, but in an understated kind of chill way. And that's, whether it's clothing or watches or ceramics or furniture or art or whatever, like those are the things I'm attracted to.
It adheres to your kind of ethos.
Yeah, it's honestly just what I found I like over the years. And, sometimes there's exceptions to those rules. There's super gaudy over the top things where I'm like, I can swear on this show, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah?
Yes.
There's,
Yeah,
certain,
please.
there's certain things where I'm like, fuck, that is nuts, and I love it. And there's other times where I'm like, that's hideous. Like, just give me something. Like, why'd you do that? Why'd you ruin it? You
Well,
know?
do you have any watches in your box that would surprise us? That maybe
would
don't
surprise
adhere to that very clean, well thought out ethos.
I do have a watch that would surprise people, mostly because it's super weird and rare and from a brand you probably wouldn't guess I'd own a watch from. It was a gift from a good friend. I can't say who because he should not have given it to me. And it is, I have one of the Hublot Atelier watches. Not the original one from the 90s. I have the early 2000s one, so the 45 millimeter one. So it is a 45 millimeter black plastic Hublot. It has a quartz movement in it, so it's a red seconds hand and it ticks. And it says not for sale on the dial. It's the watch that you were given if you took your Hublot in for service. They would lend you one of these for the couple months or weeks or whatever.
I love that. That's so cool.
So I do have that. I don't really wear it. It's a 45 millimeter plastic Hublot, but it's sick and I love it. And it's one that it'll never leave the collection.
There we go. Steven has a Hublot.
Steven has a Hublot.
Yeah,
Nobody
breaking
should
news.
feel bad about it.
That's great.
We have a not so low key Hublot fan here up
Love
on stage.
Hublot. Yeah.
I kind of want another one. I'm not going to lie.
It's so creative. Like they're just doing wild things with ceramic, obviously, and yeah,
And a
they're great.
sapphire. And those colored sapphire watches are incredible.
If you look at one of their sapphire watches, like, sure, you can say, like, okay, that's not for me. But if you look at those watches, like, and I don't mean on a computer screen. If you go and, like, look at one and handle it, and you come away from it thinking that brand is, like, bullshit or doesn't know what they're doing or whatever, like, you're not paying attention. You know, you looked incorrectly.
They're very. I mean, the aesthetically, like I totally understand. Like they appeal to me, but I totally understand like why they would not appeal to someone. But
Totally.
On a technical level, like what they're doing with Sapphire is like, it's wild. It's very very cool.
No, I think it's important to have watches that maybe kind of get us out of our comfort zone a
Totally.
little bit, right?
Also, like, they're watches, right? Like, again, these aren't, like, it's not life or death. Like, have some fun with it. Like, if it's not going to be fun, you know, again, it doesn't really matter what, like, price level you're collecting at. Like, relatively speaking, these things are not cheap. Most of us are putting a lot of time and energy into researching them and checking them out and seeing watches in person and making purchasing decisions. It's a thing most of us are wearing every day. If you're not having fun with it, then, like, what's the point? Like, I just don't understand why somebody would engage in this hobby casually or seriously if it wasn't fun. It just doesn't make sense to me.
People take it very seriously, especially when it comes to Hublot. Why does Hublot get such a bad rap?
I mean, that's a
whole other
that's
podcast.
a book, I think. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if any of you out there have any strong feelings on Hublot, you can come and talk to us afterwards
sure.
and let us know. We'd love to hear from you. All right. So in closing, like people coming into this space and people who are kind of looking to, make their own mark or kind of build up their collection, what advice or what would you tell them? How would you advise them to kind of go about?
I mean, come to Windup is I think a good tip if you can. If you can't come to a Windup, I think find other enthusiasts to talk to and to learn from, and try on watches. Just experience as many watches as you can, because you don't really know what appeals to you until it appeals to you, until you see it on your wrist and you and something kind of hits you. So that was my strategy. Just kind of diving in and experiencing as many watches as I could. And I mean, I don't know if it's worked out for me. I have a weird collection.
I think you do have a weird collection. Well, it's not too weird. It's just it's you.
Just weird enough.
Just weird
Yeah.
enough.
Yeah.
And on that note, it's okay to make some mistakes. You're gonna get watches that you just
for
don't
sure.
connect with,
Yeah.
and they're gonna go out. And
You got to
that's
embrace
okay.
that. I think you got to kind of
Totally.
You made that point earlier, Stephen. You have to kind of understand that it's a process and that it's okay to to kind of fall out of love with something, and to understand that you liked something at one point in your life, and then you change as a person, and you decide I need to let go of this and move on to what I like now. And it's a constant process of refining your taste.
Yeah, and I'll say as a non-Worn and Wound employee, coming to events like this is very seriously what I would recommend. You get to see a lot of watches, which is a great thing. You also get to talk to lots of watch collectors and people in the industry, and just watch people. And I just, thinking back over my career, I've learned so much more from just being in a room and chit-chatting, what seems kind of sometimes mindless chit-chat with watch people, versus trying to read books or go deep on the forums or whatever, like that's valuable. But just like being around watch people and watch culture and, oh, what's on your wrist? What's on your, oh, what do you think about this thing that we both just saw 10 minutes ago? Like, that's how you learn. And it's like anything, whether it's watches or anything else. It's, there's a lot of knowledge at these events and outside of these events, but there's lots of knowledge in the watch community. And for the most part, people are pretty excited to have other people excited about watches. So like people will talk to you for a long time and about a lot of different things. And like, that's how you learn. So yeah, I would say come to the events for sure. Try on as many watches as you can for sure. But also like if you come to one of these events and you realize after you've left that you like, other than like asking people if you could try stuff on, you didn't really talk to people, I think you kind of did it wrong. Like you should come to these things and try to be like as outgoing as you possibly can be. You'll come away with so much more.
It's a really great community, and so like you have to take advantage of that. You have to, engage people in conversation.
I think we may take it for granted. This might be a lonely hobby for some people who maybe their friend group isn't really into watches or their significant other isn't into watches. And so they only have these kind of like online. So you come here and you talk to other people that are actually into it, where we maybe are surrounded by them all day, every day.
And like, it's been my job for basically a decade to like talk to people about watches. I still love talking to people about watches. Like I'm very happy to just like be here on a Saturday chit-chatting about watches with everybody. It's a fun thing. And, if after doing it for probably tens of thousands of hours, if not more, over the last decade, I'm still excited about it. I promise you, lots of other people are still really excited to talk.
Yeah, because there's a lot to be excited about. I think
Totally.
The people that we come across, the brands that we see, some of the ideas we see being executed is awesome. And I guess one last thing I wanted to ask you, but if there's other things that you find exciting in either like brands in particular that you're paying attention to, or kind of ideas that you see being implemented that you're like, oh, this is really exciting to me, because I know we've been around a while. We see a lot of watches. Sometimes it's harder to get like, oh wow, you see something that's like, that's exciting.
Yeah, I would say I'm really excited. I think when we first saw the sort of like micro brand trend evolve, maybe let's say 5-10 years ago, let's say 10 years ago, really, a lot of it was about like, hey, a lot of the watches we love are too expensive. Let's figure out how to make versions of those watches or like riffs on those watches that are a little more affordable and where we can like, maybe we're not using a handmade Swiss movement, or maybe the dial's not finished by hand, but we're going to like try to give you that same look, like whatever. And that's great. And no shade at that at all. Truly, I bought a lot of those watches, like great. I'm really excited that we're seeing so many people bring themselves to the products. Like just walking around upstairs, you chat with a lot of the folks at the smaller brands, and it's like, oh, well, like this was my other hobby, and I also love watches, and so I'm going to design watches with my other thing in mind. Or, hey, I noticed that like I love this kind of watch and that kind of watch, and there was nothing that really brought those things together. Or I think getting the personalities in is really key. And I think if you look, again, if we want to look at the high end and the brands that have been established, like that's what made both Urwerk and MB&F successful, is that like MB&F is Max. If you meet Max and you look at those watches, he is in every one of those products, and it's impossible to buy or wear one without kind of like embodying him a little bit. Same with the Urwerk guys, with Felix and Martin. And I think same with most of the brands here. And like that's what I love, is that we're seeing watches that are clearly made by people with opinions and ideas who are making idiosyncratic products for themselves first. This isn't like designed by committee where you get like 10 executives around a table and they're like, okay, here's our revenue target for next year. Here's our sales figures from last year. How do we reverse engineer a product to get us from point A to point B? And I'm excited to see more of the former and less of the latter.
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody's not complaining about it, then you're doing something wrong.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Right? I remember Max recounting to me years ago, a similar, he's just doing what he wants to do. If people like it, great, but he's not really thinking about anything else beyond that. So it's really just him kind of filtered through.
Yeah, and I mean, even in what the three of us do, right? Like, you guys know this. Like, if somebody's not saying something mean about you in a comment section somewhere, you're not doing a very good job at your job.
That's right.
100%.
Yeah, so.
That's what I tell my mom when she's worried about.
Same.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me. This was really, really fun.
We appreciate you. Where can people go see more of you, get more of you?
I think these days the best place to see more of me is on Instagram. It's at SJ Pulvirent. You can also search my name, Stephen Pulvirent. I have a website as well with my personal work with my photography on it. Those are probably the best ways to get a hold of me these days.
Awesome. Well, if you're not familiar, definitely go check out Stephen Pulvirent. Very talented, lovely gentleman, very stylish too. Thanks again for being here. And thank all of you for being here. Thank you for being a part of San Francisco Windup Watch Fair. We do all this for you, and we appreciate every single one of you. And thank you if you're listening. Thank you for tuning in. And until next time, take care.